has provided quintessentially Zionist, who wrote this, satirical and unique view of Israel to the world. Yaakov Kirschen is a Bonei Zion 2014 prize recipient for culture, sports, and art.
Not in sports.
Anything, no, that's the name of
I know.
that's the name of the ministry.
So it could be that I won for my sports ability.
Is there anything else I should say about you? Okay. Yaakov Kirschen.
Hello. Okay, so I turned my phone off. You could do that too, unless you're expecting a call. Okay, so here we are, and it's nice to be together with you guys. Is this working?
Yes.
Okay.
If you hold it next to your face.
I'm going to take directions from this lady, because she's not afraid to tell people what they should do. Like this? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that raises the question of who we are, because normal people wouldn't do a thing like that, right? So there's a joke about a Jewish college in England, and they have a rowing team, crew rowing, they have long boats, and they go like that. And they practice, and they practice, and they practice, and they always lose. How many people know this joke? All right, we're going to have to keep going. Because what happens is, with jokes, they fall off, right? So like some jokes, you have to know a little Yiddish, some you have to know a lot of Yiddish. Okay, I heard one that goes totally flat unless you're really old enough, right? The question is, what comes between fear and sex? Finnif. Fear. Finnif, sex, zibbin. All right, but that requires, people don't laugh unless you point it out, so it's a bump joke. So the joke I was telling, which you guys already knew, you collect this. So they keep losing, the rowing team keeps losing. So what do? They go to their coach and they say, look, how come the Goyim always beat us? We always lose. We want you to go to Oxford University. We want you to spy on them and find out their secret. And so he goes off and he spies on them, and he comes back and he assembles a crew, and all these Jewish kids say, well, did you find their secret? And he said, yes. And what is it? He said, with them, there's only one person standing in the boat and yelling, and the others are all sitting there and rowing. So that's who we are, and we are notoriously without any understanding or feeling for those who come behind us, and if we were mistreated, they should be mistreated. That makes it all fair. And I remember there was a joke when the Russians first came here, and that was we got these Russians and we stuck them all in ulpans and stuff. And one day, a guy from Reshut Shidduch goes, I can talk that kind of English, right? So goes down to it, and he sees there's this Russian guy in front of the place, new Russian. You're studying Hebrew? He says, yes. He said, with your new Hebrew, could you tell us what Israel is like in one word? And he says, Tov. Said, Tov. Wow. If you had two words, Lo Tov. So the whole idea of, wow, that went right in front of the camera. There's probably like a wave goes by. Learning Hebrew is obviously one of the interesting ongoing challenges of living in Israel, because one of the things that happens, I've discovered, is that you forget your English faster than you learn Hebrew. I remember years ago being in a bus with a former wife, And these things will happen. I got a better one now. She doesn't mind me telling off-color jokes. And we were riding along, and it was me and 3 English teachers who had immigrated to Israel. And we had lived in Arad, and we were coming on a bus from Beersheba. And we passed by, and there are these Bedouin encampments and stuff. And we passed by, and there's a cow. And one of the English teachers says, "There's a cow standing and eating grass." And one of the other teachers says, "There's a word for that. There's a word for standing and eating grass? I'm sure there's a word for that." And then someone says, "Grazing." And everybody says, "Grazing." And there were like 4 Anglo-Saxons who this word had not come out of their mouths for many years. And we were sitting there saying, "Grazing, the cow is grazing." And then we noticed all these Israelis sitting around and looking at us. But in any case, so I did my best to get acclimated like you guys and to learn Hebrew and not be too upset about it. And when I came to Israel, we came to Jerusalem, and we were in an absorption center, and we each had 1 plate and 1 fork and 1 spoon and a flat bed with a straw mattress, and we were like really happy. And one day we got a notice saying that our lift had arrived, and I would have to go down to Ben Gurion to get it. And so I took a bus, went to Ben Gurion, and that was, I don't know, you guys must be here from the old days, because nobody's coming now, right? Okay. So back in the old days, there was the El Al building. It was a big blue building, and then there was this whole open area, and there was like a budka where the Egged bus was. And I went in to get the lift. I had 2 packages which had sent from America, 2 crates. And I went in and I waited on this long line, and then they took out these papers and all, and I had to pay the tax on the import duties on these 2 crates. And then I went to pick them up, and they told me that one had been lost, and the other had been sent to a warehouse in Tel Aviv. So I said, "Why do I have to pay tax, import tax, on something you lost?" And they said, "Well, if we told you first you had lost it, you would not have paid the tax." I said, "Okay, I'll go to this warehouse now." And they said, no, it closes at 2 o'clock every day, but you're being charged storage. I was sort of upset, so I left grumbling, and I went to the Eged Budka. There was a little bench. And I went up and I said in my brand new Hebrew, "Matai ha'otobus leYerushalayim?" And the guy says, "B'sha'a shalosh." I sit down, I wait, I look at my watch, it's now 3:15. "Lo haya otobus b'shalosh." And he says, "Maybe there'll be one at 4. So, at this point, I'm really getting angry. I've had enough of this mistreatment, so I decide I won't take a bus, I'll take a sharut. So, I don't know where they are, I start across this area, and a cop is coming. And I stop him, and in my new Hebrew, I say, "Eifo hasharutim?" And he says, "In the building over there." And I say, "B'toch habinyan?" And he says, "Of course, inside the building." He says, "Where are you from?" I say, "I'm from New York." He says, "Well, where is it, New York?" I said, "In New York, on every street corner, they have a pole and a sign line, and everybody stands and waits their turn with no pushing. And he says, I've never seen this in a movie about New York. And I say, then I'll show you everything in the movies. And I continued on, and then suddenly it hit me. I said, screw him. Let him go to New York the next time he's there, and let him look for a street corner laboratory. And then I got a job at the Post. And we had, at the Jerusalem Post back in those days, we had a room which was a translator's room. Because back then, if you took an ad in the Post, they would translate it into Hebrew or go into Haaretz. If you took an ad in the Luach of Haaretz, they would translate it into English and it would go into the Post. And I was sitting in that room one day when one of the translators asked out loud, how do you say efficiency in Hebrew? And someone said, Dag Bayam. A fish in sea is Dag Bayam. So since then,
Efficiency.
efficiency.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so getting to the matter of jokes. Jokes is the way that we communicate as Jews. And we have made jokes and Jewish humor a way that we communicate, the way we say things, the way we talk about the reality. These jokes change if you're in Chutz La'aretz, or if you're here, or whatever. And all the jokes that I remember from before I made Aliyah was a joke about Richard Nixon. He was in the White House, and a spaceship lands on his front lawn. Front lawn of the White House is a spaceship, and it's 17 stories tall. And the army comes out, and the spaceship is surrounded, and there's tanks, and there's guns, and there's army, and there's bazookas, and there's helicopters flying around. And Nixon is hiding behind the curtain, and he's looking, realizes he has to go out. So he goes out, pushes through, stands at the base of this ship, and he looks up, and as he's looking, he hears, and he sees a crack is forming on this spaceship, and it describes a door 10 stories tall, and the door slides open, and coming out is a giant figure, so tall he has to bend his head, even though the doorway is 10 stories tall. And he steps out, and he looks down, and he's very thin and bony, and all of his clothes are black. And another one comes out, and another one comes out. And these three towering black-clad figures look down at Nixon. And Nixon says, "Where are you from?" "We are from Alpha Centauri." And Nixon says, "Do all the people on Alpha Centauri wear black?" And he says, "Only the Hasidim." Which was like the joke about Bush, who was running for office, and of course he wanted to get his Jewish money in, so he was invited to the home of Jewish donors, and they served him a lovely Jewish meal, and he had matzah ball soup, which he had never had before, but being a true trooper, he tried it, cut the matzah ball. He says, "Really interesting, what is this?" And they said, "Those are matzah balls." He said, "Interesting, do you use any other parts of the matzah?" Now, these jokes are sort of like lightweight jokes. I mean, we have jokes if we want to deal with relationships, like the most stressful relationship, obviously, is husband and wives. So there's a joke about a guy, a bank robber, goes into a bank, he's got his gun, he goes up to the teller, pulls out his gun, puts a bag on the table, says to the teller, "Fill this bag with money." The teller fills it with money, and he goes, bang! And he shoots the teller. And he turns around, it's when he notices that other people have come and there's a line behind him. So he looks at the guy behind him and he says, "Did you see me kill the teller?" The guy says, "Yes." Bang! He kills him. Looks at the next guy. He says, "Did you see me kill the teller?" He says, "Yes." Bang! He kills him. He goes to the next guy. He says, "Did you see me kill the teller?" He says, "No, but my wife was looking." So, here's a joke about a Nazi walking down the street. His name is Hans. He's walking down the street in Berlin, and he's coming up to a place where he knows this is the house of a famous rabbi. And he sees his friend, another Nazi, Fritz, is coming out of the building. He goes up, he says, "Fritz, you coming out of the building of the rabbi?" He says, "Yep." He says, "What are you doing in the rabbi's building?" He says, "I'm taking lessons." He says, "You're taking lessons from a rabbi? You're a Nazi." He says, if we want to kill these people, if we want to destroy them, we must learn all of their ways. We must learn everything about their culture. Then we can destroy them." And Hans says, "That's brilliant." And Fritz says, "Yes, this is what we call tuchus." Now, the interesting thing about that joke is that is a joke from the 30s in Berlin. Okay? So we have been telling jokes about the real situation we're in since the very beginning. Okay? I wrote a joke because I wanted to see how street jokes appear. So I wrote a joke, and I began to tell people, and I thought at some point someone would tell me the joke, and then I would have found out that some street jokes are actually written. But I didn't know when to stop, and then I would keep telling the joke, and then people would say, "You didn't tell the joke right, it's wrong, this joke was in Leo Rosten's Joys of Yiddish in 1920, or blah, blah, blah." I'll tell you the joke quick. It's called the camel joke. How many people know the camel joke? Wow. Okay. Ooh, that was pretty. Anyway, here's a joke about a new immigrant comes to Israel and he wants to live in his ancient Semitic... When did you sneak in? Ancient Semitic Jewish homeland. But he lives in a bedroom community right off of Tel Aviv, and it just doesn't feel right. So he goes and he buys a camel. That's why it's called the camel joke. So he buys a camel, and he gets up in the morning, and he gets on the camel, and he rides on the highway down to Tel Aviv, and he ties up the camel, and he goes to the building where he works, and takes the elevator upstairs, and he works on his computer all day, and he comes down, he gets on the camel, and he rides home. Day one. Day two, comes down, gets on the camel, rides to work, ties it up, upstairs, works on the computer, down, gets on the camel, rides home. Third day, camel, rides on the highway, Tel Aviv, up, works all down, on the camel, back home. Fourth day, comes out, camel is gone. Someone has stolen his camel. I keep worrying about, am I holding this right? So he goes to the police station, he says, "I want to report a missing camel." Cop says, sit down, takes out the missing camel forms. Says to him, okay, was this a brown camel or a gray camel? You know, it was like camel colored, brown or gray. I didn't know if it got brown or gray. Show me a picture of a brown camel, a gray camel, I'll tell you which it is. Color unknown. He says, did this have one hump or two humps? He says, you know, I had it for 3 days. It had a big blanket on it. It had a saddle, a wooden saddle. I never had it washed, nothing. I don't know if the saddle was sitting on top of one hump or in between two humps. Writes down number of humps unknown. He said, was this a male camel or a female camel? He said, it was a male camel. He said, gee, you know, you didn't know if it was brown or gray. You didn't know if it had one hump or two humps. How could you be so sure it's a male camel? He says, because every day while I was riding on the highways, the Israelis would lean out of their passing cars and say, look at the big schmuck on that camel. So a few years ago, Obama was wow. I didn't mean to say Obama, I mean to say somebody else that I didn't like. Olmert. Well, I actually did like Olmert because up till then, living in Tel Aviv, having moved away from Jerusalem, whenever we would go to parties, I would be the crazy right-wing person that people would scream at. But after Olmert came in, there were no more left-right arguments. People would just say to each other, what are we going to do? This guy is so terrible. Everybody realized that we had a really bad guy, and there was a joke at the time, and it's the Olmert joke, which didn't get around much outside of Israel. It's a story about a guy who gets in his car and he's driving on the highway to Tel Aviv. And he's riding along, and all of a sudden, all of the traffic is stopped as far as the eye can see. Nothing is moving. Then he sees some guy is coming from car to car. And finally the guy comes to rolls down the window. He says, what's going on? Guy says, really terrible. Hamas has kidnapped Olmert. They've taken him to Gaza City. And if we don't raise $2 million, they're going to burn him alive, and I'm going from car to car for contributions. And the driver says, what do most people give? And he says, about a liter. For Americans, about a gallon. So I began to look for the oldest Jewish joke, right? Because whenever you tell a joke, there's a funnier joke, and that's an older one. So it turns out the oldest Jewish joke is in the Bible. And it is where we have come out of Egypt. And obviously we're upset. We're there for hundreds of years, and they come and say, we're all going to leave, and say, okay, I'll go along, we'll make some sandwiches. No time, we got to go. We'll bake tasteless crackers on the hot rocks. Centuries, you can't take time to make a couple sandwiches. That's not the joke, that's only my view of what was going on. But what the Bible tells us is that we came to the shores of the Red Sea. And suddenly we saw the chariots coming to destroy us. Pharaoh had changed his mind. It's something we know about. Treaties that... I'm not going to go that way. So we look and we see the chariots. These chariots are the killing machines of the day. These are the Patton tanks. These are the stealth bombers. You can't get a more efficient killing machine than these that are coming at us. You would think, I mean, if Gentiles had written the Bible, it would say, and they called unto Moses, saying, bring forth yet another miracle. What does it say? It says they turned to Moses and said, were there no graves in Egypt? You brought us into the desert to die. It's a joke. It's a Jewish joke. It's the Olmert joke. And in fact, the fact that it is a joke that we can still laugh at shows the consistency of Jewish humor. And going through, were there no graves in Egypt, all the way down to the Nazi Tuchus joke, down to Ulmer, down to today, we are, as a people, convinced that we are led by idiots. And we have believed that since the very beginning. And we maintain that kind of attitude. I often say that anybody who says that every people gets the government it deserves is an anti-Semite. But once we understand that humor is the way we really communicate, then after 40 years of doing Dry Bones cartoons, I realized it was time for us to talk to the future. And how do we talk to the future? Who's going to be listening to us? Well, everything is going digital. Jews are no longer living in tight little communities. Everybody is spread out. Families are... The one thing we have is the Haggadah. And what's interesting about the Haggadah is that non-Jews are constantly looking for the secret book of the Jews. Obviously, we have some kind of secret book. So you have South Koreans are studying the Talmud, right? And you got different people studying different things. Those people who couldn't find what they thought was a secret book made it up. Protocols of the Elders of Zion, that's the secret book. Had a friend who was a diplomat in China, beloved by the people she worked with, and they had a going away party for her. And they liked her so much, they gave her a gift, which was a leather-bound Chinese translation of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion to show that they were really studying to find out how the Jews did it. Now, it suddenly occurred to me that we do have a secret book. And it's obvious. It's obvious what our secret book is. So I'll stop because I'm getting too serious. There's a joke about obvious. Sherlock Holmes, noted for saying if you really want to hide something, you put it in plain view. Sherlock Holmes is out with Watson, and they're out in the woods. Why are they out in the woods? Because Sherlock is collecting leaves and fungi, toadstools, all kinds of stuff to bring back to his lab so that when he investigates crimes, he will be able to deduce what has happened. And it comes to the end of the day, and Sherlock and Watson come back to their camp, and they both climb into their sleeping bags, and they're lying there, and Sherlock says, Watson, look above you. What do you see? And Watson says, I see the stars. Many, many stars. And Sherlock says, from sea, do you know the joke? Yeah. No, okay, well, don't tell him. You see the stars, myriad stars, millions of stars. And Watson, what do you derive from seeing these millions of stars? And he says, I derive that we live in a fabulous universe with millions and millions and millions of stars. And who knows how many intelligent life forces, how many beings may be out there and looking up at their skies and seeing us. A wonderful, wonderful universe. And you, Sherlock, from seeing the stars above us, what do you deduce? And he says, I deduce that someone has stolen our tent. So the obvious secret book of the Jews turns out to be the Haggadah. If you are not Jews, I would say, do you know the Jews have a book? This book has been handed down from generation to generation. Every year at their spring festival, the Jews get together, not in their synagogues, not in their temples, but in their own homes. And they sit around a table and they read aloud and perform a ritual. And this ritual is designed to tell them how to teach the next generation to be Jews. And in this ceremony, they take a glass of wine and they drip out drops, and the first word is blood. And they open the door and they call upon their Creator to pour out his wrath upon those who had. It's a description of our secret book. To us, it's the Haggadah. And we sit around, and some of us treat it as a really heavy burden. And some of us say, hey, listen, we're not going to come back after the meal. And some of us are looking for a 12-minute Haggadah, and, and we could just do it and flip the pages and whatever. So I realized that the way to speak to the future is to speak by annotating the Haggadah. So what I did was I took a text of the Haggadah and treated it as if each page was like a page of Talmud. We have the text, and here you got Rashi and Mashmo and whatever his name is, and you go through, so you could read the text, or you could read the text and the commentary, or the commentary and the text, or however you choose to do it. And we created this Haggadah. When I say we, I mean me, and I mean LSW, with a long-suffering wife, who dealt with that with Kim. Is Kim here? We don't know. And there we have the lovely Kim, talented book designer, who came to me with questions like, there are two kinds of type. One in which the numbers sit on the line with the letters, and another where the numbers go below the line of the letters. And things like that. So she did an absolutely gorgeous job, and the book is, to a large extent, really the result of how cool she is. And the cover is totally hers, even though she stole my cartoons to do it. And when you read a newspaper and there's a cartoon, you're reading the news and the cartoon is talking to you about the news. So the cartoon is not part of the newspaper. The cartoon is sort of over your shoulder, joining you in reflecting on the news. And that's the way we've done the Haggadah here. So you can go through this Haggadah and at the same time be having the second experience parallel with it of following along with Dry Bones. And I hope that this will somehow spread out and become the Haggadah that will be from our generation. Normally you go to a Haggadah and they're going to show you woodcuts from some pogrom in Poland, 1411 or something. The Haggadah is like looking back. And I think it's time for the Haggadah to look forward. And this should be, we're going to very quickly become the old timers, the people who lived in the olden days. And I want this Haggadah to be our message for the future. And I wrote it in our names, in our terms. I got to tell you something really interesting about the Haggadah, Haggadahs in general. And that is, the story of Passover is very dangerous. Okay? It's dangerous because it's an Exodus story with a great leader. So in the Haggadah, it's interesting where you get the line, I am not an angel, I am not a seraph, I am not a messenger. What is all that about? That's so that we as Jews would not become like Muslims following a holy messenger, that we wouldn't become like Christians following a demigod. This was to protect us from this possibility. And therefore, the Haggadah practically does not mention Moshe Rabbeinu. People used to say, Moses isn't mentioned in the Bible. It's mentioned in two places. His staff. Okay? It's not Moses, this is Moses' staff, but it mentions his name. So this idea of keeping Moses out of the Haggadah was an attempt to keep him from being seen as a superhuman being. This totally failed. It failed because in the 30s, when the whole idea of the Übermensch and Übermenschen and the whole Nazi philosophy based on a new Übermensch, man and Superman, that there were the lower orders of people, and then there were the new higher evolved people. And the low people, the mud people, the Jews, the blacks, all these were almost subhuman and then superhuman. When that was going on, there were a couple of cartoonists in America, Jewish cartoonists, and they were looking for a cartoon to do. If you're looking for a cartoon to do today, maybe you would think, well, what's popular today? You might look at nanotechnology and do a nano world, or parallel universes. I'll do a cartoon. Do something about what people are talking about. And what people were talking about in the 30s was the Superman. So these two Jews decided they would do a cartoon about the Superman. Well, what the hell do they know about a Superman? What would a Superman mean to a couple of Jews? Well, the first thing that came to their mind was Moses. So what's the Superman story? He comes from this ancient, wonderful civilization. His mother puts him into a little basket, shoots him off to a different world, where he is picked up and raised by people in this society. He has his real name, which, like Jewish male names, ends in L. Michael, Israel, Yisrael. So his name is Kael, his father's name is Jor-El. He goes and he takes a nice Goyish American name, Clark Kent. Could you think of anything less Jewish than Clark Kent? And what does he do? He gets a job in the media. He's like a Jewish reporter. He has this problem because there's this shiksa girl chasing him all around. When he does something, he doesn't say, I, Superman, have done this. Because we all know that the highest form of charity is given anonymously. Superman is a totally Jewish story. And I would say about 10 years ago, I gave a lecture on that Superman was a totally Jewish story to a group of people from Florida. And one of them got up and said to me, where did you hear this story? I said, I never heard this story, but it's obvious as you go through it. And he said, well, I'm retired. I worked at DC Comics for many years, and this is one thing we were never allowed to talk about. So that's the story. And as a result, there is not a single Haggadah with illustrations that you will find that doesn't have a picture of Moshe Rabbeinu in it. Because it's what's missing. It's the dramatic story. It's raising and the sea and the whole story. So, of course, in our Haggadah, you'll find Moshe Rabbeinu and all like that. We got some questions here? Yes?
Well, I don't see a keep on your head. You're obviously a very knowledgeable Jew. And we, as a political commentator, I see a split of the Haredim and the Zionist Jews like I've never seen before. Can you comment on that issue?
Jews are stupid. Well, it's the answer. Tell me how 80% of American Jews could vote for Obama thinking he's good for Israel.
It's impossible.
They should come here, be Haredi, but not serve in the army.
That's what they are. For some reason, the American yeshiva boys that I go with, and et cetera, somehow have coordinated with the Haredis and think that somehow they don't have to defend the country somehow or other.
Years ago, I did a cartoon at Hanukkah about religious kids refusing to go and fight because they were busy studying. But hey, we are not the smartest of people. I think that the anti-Semitic libel, which has killed more Jews than anything else, is a ridiculous idea that we're smart. I mean, if you took Italians and then killed them and drove them out of their country and went to a second country where they killed them and drove them away, by the time they got to the third country, they'd say, yeah, enough of this. I'm going home, this is the way it is out here, and like that. But Jews get to a place and say, Spain is really nice. Or, New Jersey is lovely. Right? Berlin is a great place. We don't learn. Okay? We know from what our, quote, sages tell us, that we didn't all come out of Egypt, that we didn't all come out of the Babylonian whatever, and look at us. We're the idiots who decided to come here. And we've left behind the masses of Jews, many of them are families or friends, who are living off there, and we can't understand it. And at this point, I think we have to recognize that we are split into two, that 86, I forget what the percentage is, but close to 90% of Jews in the world live either in Israel or an English-speaking country. And this Haggadah, which is in English and Hebrew, seems to me is our Haggadah for now, and it is filled with Jewish humor, and it is filled with the most accurate translation that I could manage, and that required sitting and arguing with rabbis as to whether Baruch HaMakom means blessed is the Lord, or does it mean blessed is the place? It means Lord, because when we say Makom, we mean Lord.
Right.
Well, if it meant Lord, you could have written Lord. So what I want to say, people in English should know. So hours and hours of arguing to get a totally parva translation, which would be as accurate as possible, and framed everything with Dry Bones cartoons to make a Seder a really wonderful event. And then the question was, do we send this off to China and get it printed real cheap and stick it up on Amazon and do that? And instead we decided we wanted it totally done in Israel, we wanted it published in Jerusalem, we wanted it printed in Jerusalem. This is ours, and maybe next year we'll make a cheapo version and we'll print it in China and do all kinds of things. But right now, what we have is a very limited edition, special thing that I think you will really love and will make a great gift. Was that an answer to a question? Yeah, there's another question. Yes.
Dry bones, is that from the prophecy?
Oh my God, I messed up again. Every time, first of all, wait. When I decided to do this cartoon, it had to have a name. Kirshen's Corner, you know, what kind of cutesy thing. Now, one of the reasons that I came to Israel was because of my getting involved with reading the book of Ezekiel. When you read the book of Ezekiel, I mean, if you're religious, it's easy. But if you're not religious, then it's really messed up. Because you're reading stuff. I mean, if Ezekiel sees a guy on a winged horse, that's okay. If Ezekiel sees a heavier-than-air flying machine with fire coming out of the bottom, then already I got problems with this. And this led me eventually to Israel. And therefore I said, well, what will I do? If I'm writing about Israel, I'm writing about the things that Ezekiel didn't mention, like the bus drivers, right? So when I was here, when I first got here, people would write into the Jerusalem Post and say, bus driver closed the door on my leg, dragged me for 3 blocks, right? And then under that it would say, Egged spokesman M. Schiffman replies. And he would say, the cooperative owner-drivers of the Egged Cooperative are first and foremost in defense of the country. He would never take the blame. Which is why when I decided to create a character, I would take a character and make him like M. Schiffman, but he would take the blame. So his name was M. Schuldig. Schuldig meaning blame in Yiddish. Ich bin schuldig. So M. Schuldig. But I needed a name for the comic strip itself that everyone would know what it meant. So I called it Dry Bones. And I have never given a speech where somebody didn't get up and say, why did you call it Dry Bones? Which makes me feel like an idiot. So I always say to myself, when you get up there, before exposing yourself to this ridicule, the first thing you should do is tell people why it's called Dry Bones. Like, as you know, it's called blah, 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 blah. So thank you for that humiliating moment. You have another question? But
when you talk about Ezekiel and you call it dry bones, it's almost like it's almost redemptive in a sense because
redemptive for him or me?
Because you're talking about something that eventually is going to be something beautiful in the future, something messianic. So whenever
Am I allowed to talk about something beautiful?
because whenever I read Dry Bones, I share this with so many people. We love it so much, and we say, "Who is this man that he's so medriyak? He's just so precise. He's just."
There's a saying: behind every successful man, there is an astonished woman. She's sitting over there. Yes.
I always thought, before I came on Aliyah, I always thought that when God gave blacks rhythm and gave Irish the gift of words and gave Italians charm and great food and flair for design, He gave Jews humor. But I came here and discovered it's not like that. One of the most difficult aspects for me of living in Israel is that there is so little humor. There's a lot of great professional humor, but spontaneous humor on the street, I don't find it. And I don't find very many Israelis who understand humor. I'm mystified by the fact that you seem to find so much spontaneous humor in Israel. Where is it hiding and why am I missing it?
In the first year I was in Israel, I was in Jerusalem, and I was in downtown Jerusalem at some sort of counter coffee place, and somebody fell off his stool. And the entire restaurant broke out screaming laughter, and I said to myself, I'm in trouble. The second time I knew I was in trouble was I had gone downtown and was going to cash a check. And in that time, in the 70s, to cash a check, you had to go to the bank, and then they had to fill out a form in triplicate, and one for they'd tear off one and throw it away, and then they give you the other one, and then you would go to the kuppah, and there was this whole thing which no one would believe today. This whole thing. So I told my wife I would go to the bank and I would meet her at a little store. What was it? There was a store done by, was it Moshe Dayan's wife? Mesquite, that's right, it was Mesquite. So I said, I'll meet you at Mesquite, which was Kikar Tzion then, or something like that. Could be. So I said to her, I'll meet you there. And I went to the bank, and it took me a long time. And then I went and got to Mesquite, and I looked around, and she's not there. And I asked the proprietor, who said maybe she went to the dress store next door. So I went next door, and I said, I think my wife is here. She was in Mesquite. And the proprietor said, she's in the changing booth, the last booth. So I went up and I opened the door. I remember this lady to this day. She had blue panties on. It is burnt into my mind. I have the door open. She's standing there with a dress in her hand and her blue panties. And I say, At lo ha'isha sheli. And she says, Nachon. And I left. And that, coupled with the people falling off the chairs, led me to believe that there was something these people were missing. I'll tell you what it is, okay? They are bunny rabbits. You have to understand that Israelis are bunny rabbits. Jews lived around the world, and every place we were, people wanted to kill us. Okay, so we decided we were going to build a place which was like, I can't think of the word, Shmurat HaTeva, like a nature reserve.
Sanctuary.
A sanctuary. Okay, and we put a fence around it, and here we would have Jews born into a Jewish state. These people do not know what the world is like. They've been born into a nature reserve. They are protected bunny rabbits. They think there is no difference between them and the people who live in the south of France. We're all on the Mediterranean. Right? They think that the world is somehow fair. They have all kinds of bizarre ideas. Okay? We created them. But they're bunny rabbits. Jewish humor is based on the idea, the basic idea of powerlessness. In the frustration of powerlessness, you can strike out and say things. Right? But if you don't feel powerless, they're messing with us, but we'll go bomb them. And it's, where's the joke? Right?
If only we would.
It's just not there. Guy's driving down the street, and he looks in the mirror and he sees a flashing light, cop car. Car pulls him over. He says, "Officer, did I do something wrong?" Cop says, "No, but 5 blocks back, your side door opened and your wife fell out." And the driver says, "Thank God, I thought I was going deaf." So we can tell jokes because we know what the world is like. But if we go and have kids and raise them up here, they don't have Jewish humor. They don't have that taste of helplessness, which is handled through the joke. And those Jews who stood there saying, "Well, there are no graves in Egypt," right? They thought they had come to the end of the line. They didn't know that they were way before everything. They didn't know they were going to walk around for 40 years in the desert because they were led by men who wouldn't ask directions. They would come in, they would have to knock down the bricks of Jericho, that they would go through everything, that they would go through exiles and back. All of Jewish history lay ahead of them, and they thought they were the end. We're not going to survive this one. And here we are once again at that point. The entire world against us, you know? And in one of the cartoons in the Haggadah, I point out that the Haggadah says, "In every generation they will rise against you." I'm sorry, in my life it's been 3 times. It's not in every generation. We had the Nazis, we had the communists, and we have the Islamists. Right? But that is the reality of the world we live in, and it is the strength because we are the survivors. We are the people who left Egypt. We are the people who left Babylon. We are the people who came here. And we are out of step with almost everybody else. And that's who we are as a people. We've always been out of step with everybody because we are always the survivors. And we've gotten to this point where for the first time, I mean, I imagine if you were to go to your great-grandfathers or great-great-grandmothers and say, "You know, there is now a Jewish state in Israel." And they would say, "Wow." And say, "All you have to do is buy a ticket and go there." You think they would say, "Nah, I'm going to stay here in Berlin"? Don't know. All of us come from the people who got up and left. And we are the people who got up and left, but we didn't bring all of our families and friends with us. We left lots of people behind. And it would be my hope that you would pick up a couple of Haggadahs and send it off to them. and what I thought was that I would do a Haggadah and everybody would switch over and say, "Okay, I want 20 Haggadahs, I want 30 Haggadahs, we're going to switch." And that's not what's happening. What's happening is we find people saying, "Wow, I can send this to my cousin there, and I can send this to this person and that." So at the Seder, there will be a dry bones Haggadah at each Seder. People are looking at it as a gift, as a message. And I hope that you would find that. Yes?
A couple of years ago, you were talking about a program you were trying to set up at Yale University so that people would understand the jokes and how it impacted on anti-Semitism in Europe and the world. Whatever happened to that program?
Okay. I was asked to be a scholar in residence at Yale to study anti-Semitism. I said I couldn't do that because I live in Israel and I won't move away. And they said, in the academic world, you can be a scholar in residence and not be in residence.
That's cool.
This is the academic world that boycotts us, so it makes sense. So if you will go to drybones.com, easy to remember, drybones.com, there's links to all kinds of things. And one is a link to a site that I created called Secret Codes Hidden War. And it is a huge website which will allow you to understand anti-Semitism in cartoons. So that was done. I wrote a paper which is in Yad Vashem. Go to drybones.com. And from there you can get to the store where you can buy stuff. You can get to the... We're Jews, we're supposed to buy and sell shit, right? Now they're criticizing me. So if you go to drybones.com, you'll find all kinds of nice things, including some stuff I've tried to do all kinds of things, including dealing with China. And so I went, I'm a senior fellow. It's raining pennies from heaven. So I did a lot of work on that. It's very interesting, by the way, because you see anti-Semitic cartoons, and people say, well, how can you say it's anti-Semitic? Anti-Semitism is like pornography. You know it when you see it, but there's no scientific... I discovered that from the Nazis to the present day, there are secret codes that go into anti-Semitic cartoons. Okay? And that from the Nazis to the present, there are a total of only 34 images. Only 34. And if you go to that site, you'll find them. One image is horns, one image is holding a bag of money, one image is fangs, blood, one is... There are 34 and no more. You would think these idiots would be able to come up with something new. But no.
The old stuff works, man, you know.
The old stuff works.
New stuff.
And in fact, what we're dealing with is a virus, a behavioral virus. There is a science called memetics. A meme is a belief that's in your head. Okay? You go and have a chicken sandwich, have a chicken sandwich. Your Uncle Bensie dies, and you figure he's up in heaven, paying for his, somebody put this idea in your head. It didn't come into your mind, you were taught. And ideas jump from brain to brain to brain. And these brain viruses are called memes. And anti-Semitism is a specific memetic device. And what it does is, at least what I found, is it paralyzes its enemies. So that means that if you have a poverty-stricken Arab world, and you come in and you say, the Jews are evil, the Jews are demonic, and you infect them with anti-Semitism, then they will be diverted from their real enemies. Okay? So this meme is used by movements to subdue populations, but in the end is usually devoured by it. So the Nazis were National Socialists. You don't know anything about their economic policies. You don't know anything about Nazi philosophy, because all of it was destroyed as the anti-Semitism meme took it over. So go to drybones.com. Yes?
Can I ask, what about Jewish anti-Semitic cartoonists?
Can't hear you.
Jewish anti-Semitic cartoonists and Jewish anti-Semites in general, given the pressures that we are under, one of the ways to escape is to say, we're not like them, right? They can extricate themselves by becoming more anti-Semitic than the anti-Semites. And that is a mechanism of survival. Some of the greatest anti-Semites through history have been Jews who were advisors to Nazis and Muslim leaders and whatever. If you look at the siege of Jerusalem by the Assyrians, we're told that the remnants of the Jewish people were in the city of Jerusalem, and a man was sent to talk to them, and he spoke to them according to the Bible in Yehudit, and he was the Rav Shakan, and we assume that he was a Jewish turncoat. Okay, when the Caliph Omar conquered Jerusalem, he went up to the Temple Mount and wanted to find out where the temple was. And the Christians, who were the Byzantines at that point, said, no, there was never a temple here. But he knew that there was a temple here. So what he did was he went and got Jewish kids and brought them to the Temple Mount and said, where does your father pray from? And by this he triangulated it and found the spot, which had been a garbage dump. The Christians had used as a garbage dump, and he cleared it away with his hands, the Caliph Omar. And all of his men came and they cleared it away and discovered the rock. And he said, this is the place where the temple was. And at that point came time for prayers. And his chief advisor, whose name I forgot, said to him, Mecca is that way. If we stand here, we can pray across the temple to Mecca. And this guy was a converted Jew. And the caliph said to him, you're not going to Judaize our religion. This belongs to the Jews. We will pray in front of this, which is now today when you see Muslims praying, they're in front of the mosque of the dome of the rock. They pray with their butts to the dome of the rock because that was holy to the Jews as opposed to them. But the point of the story is there was a Jewish advisor there. And the anti-Semitic Jews, the Jews who, hey, Kissinger was an advisor to Nixon and told Nixon to delay the weapons coming to Israel because that would make us bow to their demands. Whole story. Yeah.
How did you leave Jerusalem for Tel Aviv?
How did I leave Jerusalem for Tel Aviv? It was an act of God. No, it really was. It really was. We were happy. We were living on Yoshua ben Nun Street in a nice little place. And then we had, it was 78, 79. There were tremendous rainstorms. It was really an unbelievable. And one day I'm sitting at home and there's a knock at the door. And I open it up and there is a guy from the Machleket Diyur HaMesukan of Jerusalem. He's from the Department of Dangerous Housing. And he says, it looks like our house is dangerous. I don't speak English. What do you want? Oh. So he goes away. And then this poor woman sitting there out there trying to sell Haggadis says to me, maybe the house is dangerous. Ah, what are you talking about? She says, well, we could call up an engineer and have him look. So we call up an engineer. And he comes to the house and he knocks on the walls and he goes around and all like that. And he's making notes and stuff. And I say to him, can I get you a cup of coffee? And he said, sure, I'll have it outside. And I said, why outside? He said, for Panasa, I'm willing to walk around in this house. But this is going to fall down and kill you. I'm going to have my coffee outside, thank you. That was the start of the story. We ended up in Tel Aviv, in the Schenken area, where we discovered all the Yerushalmim who had betrayed us by running to Tel Aviv in years before. They were all in this same street, including my daughter and grandchildren. Okay, so I'm near my daughter and grandchildren. So it took her 1.5 years of me being there for her to move to Modi'in. Anyway, from there it went on and on. Another question. Yes.
You're on the right of the political spectrum.
I'm in the middle, and everybody is moving like that. I'm in the same place.
But does that affect acceptance by the arts community in Israel, that's mostly skews to the left?
Acceptance of him, you mean?
Yeah.
I was informed that I got the Bonei Zion Award, Builder of Zion. And I went to speak to the guy who runs it, and he said, we have these committees that we put up the name and everybody argues. And he said, when we called your name, everybody raised their hands, including Colette Avital. So he was like astounded that people were voting like that. I just did a cartoon about Western women who put on Islamic headgear when they appear in public with an Iranian politician. You know? So I do that, and I get letters. I got a letter from an old dear friend of mine who was a friend from the Post, saying to me, he couldn't believe I did this cartoon and how stupid am I, and that when people go to Yad Vashem, they put on yarmulkes. You know, I wrote back to him, when women go to the Western Wall, we ask them to put on a kerchief, right? It wasn't religious. I held back from saying it shows she worships the ground he stands on. But it's absolutely crazy because there's no logic. Yeah. It's just which side are you on? And then saying that I'm right-wing or I'm left-wing, I haven't changed. I mean, it's really disappointing. But cartoons I did 20, 30 years ago, saying the exact same thing I say now.
And what does that make you feel or think?
It makes me feel that Jews are really stupid. But I've known that for a long time. So I've learned to live with that. The point is that when you do, most people when they do a cartoon, figure they're going to get somebody, right? I drew blood, I really got him. I figure if I do a cartoon that gets somebody, it's worthless. Because my goal is to change somebody's mind. I want somebody who disagrees with me to laugh, and for that moment to see it from my point of view. So if that cartoon brought back anger, it was an unsuccessful cartoon. I should have been able to do something to make him laugh so that in that moment he would have seen it from my point of view. I'm trying to seduce people, not like smack people around. Yeah.
You just said that you consider yourself to be at the center, and other people who, that's good. Is there a comic, someone who does cartooning, who you think is funny and pretty far on the right of the spectrum?
On the right?
Yes.
Well, I don't know. I mean, American cartoonists are American cartoonists, and it's not like...
No, I meant in Israel.
No, but people in Israel, when you do a cartoon in Israel, you just... Something's happening, so you go and you try to do something funny about it. But most Israeli cartoonists are like born Israelis or immigrant Russians, and it's a different thing that they're doing. It's, they do stuff about local stuff that to me is totally meaningless. We are involved in a point of history where the fate of the world is changing. Jews like us sat around and said, wow, what the hell are we going to do? The Greek Empire is falling. And we watched the Russian Empire fall, and we watched Russia fall, and we've watched civilizations change. They've come and go. And we've kept ourselves together, riding the waves. And it's happening again. And when I was a kid, it was my family, and they knew what had gone on in World War II. I didn't know. And they would sit together and they would talk in hushed terms. But I lived in America, and I had my electric trains and grew up and all like that. I went through schools. And after I graduated from college, I discovered that in 1492, not only did Columbus sail the ocean blue, but there was the start of the Inquisition. So how come the Inquisition was not meaningful enough for me to be told that if I had gone through the New York City school system? And that's when I began to get upset and to start researching stuff like Jewish art and like that, and to come in contact with the, I find, annoyingly Bashert stuff that's always around. So when I wanted to write a book about Jewish art, which was why I was studying the book of Ezekiel and studying the Merkavah and looking, right, and I had index cards. Jewish art is built on symbols. So I sat in the 42nd Street Library and I packs of cards with different symbols. And then I got into this Kabbalistic symbols and stuff, and I looked up in the phone book in New York and I found out the Kabbalah Research Society. So I went to them, and they were two bearded old men in the basement of a shoe factory in Williamsburg. And they were there with shelves and shelves of books. And I came in and I said, I'm going to write a book about Jewish art. I want to know. And they go and they get 3 books and they give them to me. And I take them home to Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights, where I live. And I look into them, and they're in Hebrew, and they're this, and I get an Israeli friend, and he helps me a little bit. And time goes on, and a year goes by. And I'm packing up and I'm going to Israel. And there's a guy in my building who is a real good friend. And I say to him, listen, I'm moving to Israel and I have these books that have been taken back to Williamsburg. you got to do me a favor and do it. And he's like this religious guy, so he's got to do it. So he said, okay. And I say, you know what? I'm going to go down and I'm going to get myself one last New York pizza. And I go out of the building and I go across the street and I get myself a pizza slice and I walk out of the door and I bump into one of the two bearded guys. And I say to him, you! And he looks and says, you! And I said, what are you doing in Washington Heights? And he said, I thought I was here for something else, but apparently I'm here to pick up the books. So that is the kind of lives we live, and our survival. I often say that the only proof of God is the continued existence of this country with the kind of leaders we have and the kind of strategy. Totally bizarrely insane to think that this is
Mark Twain said that. Mark Twain said that first.
right. Another question. Yowza. Yes.
Thank you, I just want to say thank you.
Oh, no, we have a lady there, a question.
It's actually not.
I accept your
I
thanks.
thought you were looking at me.
It's actually not a question, it's a comment.
I'm sorry it wasn't a question, it was just her waving her hands.
No, I did want to make a comment.
Okay.
At one point or another, you or someone here said something about your comics being as relevant today as they were when they first came out. I just wanted to tell you, I was always enamored of your, you've been here too long series. And there's one from there that I found continuously relevant, and I actually used it just the other day. The one that shows
You know you're here too long when?
when you go back home to visit your friends and family and you sit around the kitchen table in the morning and you're telling them about what life here is like. And you say things like, well, I took the kid to the gun in the morning, then I stopped at the Makolet and I picked up some lachmaniyot and they're sitting there with question marks above their heads, wondering what language you're talking. And I always used it as proof because I always said, let me go and become illiterate in 2 languages.
Well, that's one of the great benefits of coming on Aliyah, is you become someone who speaks a foreign language fantastically well. But you realize that the main problem with Hebrew is I gotta remember if a chair is a boy or a girl. I have a great deal of difficulty with that. Now, that means that when we speak exactly like Italian immigrants. The table, she's too small. The chair is broken, right? So we used to think it's funny that they assign male and female to everything. Now I'm trying it and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Are there any more questions before we, I gotta say one last thing about Israel. Oh yeah, you got a question.
Yeah, you're talking about Israeli leadership, wonderful national leadership. You have
Also religious leadership is not just the politicians.
True.
They put the chief rabbis in there right along
but
with it.
you had a long time
I
ago.
can't believe that one year before Yom Kippur, the chief rabbi came on to tell us all, it's not our fault. I couldn't believe it. Something was going on. It's not our fault.
You used to use the figure of King Solomon to represent the Israeli government.
Yes.
So of course he's a perfect tipesh.
Right.
I haven't seen him for a long time.
You'll see him in the Haggadah. And in fact, the Haggadah is filled with stuff that you might not realize, but has taken deep work. There are 2 symbols in Judaism. One is the shield of David, which is a triangle on a triangle. The other is the seal of Solomon, which is a square on a square. So when you look at Solomon, my cartoons, he has a seal of Solomon on his head. Another thing is, a few years ago, this country was divided between the people in favor of the pullout and the people against. That's when everybody wore orange or blue, which is why when you go through the Haggadah, Mr. Schuldig wears orange and blue, because to me he represents everybody. And the last thing is that I have always explained to people that Israel, when people sit around and talk about Israel, we are like a group of men who are in love with a really crappy woman. And all we can do is sit around and say, you know what she did to me yesterday? And we complain about this country that we love. And it is really incredible that we, of all our families, should have survived to have the honor to be in this moment in history, in this country. And after 40 years, like 40 years in the desert, that is the real reason that I sat down to do a Haggadah. I think we have all of us progressed to a certain point in history. And we should recognize that we're in the right place at the right time. Thank you.
I thank everybody. Greatly appreciated. And for those of you who don't know, the Haggadah is on sale in the back.
Anything she says, I do.